Ladies and gentlemen, this documentary is a special dedication to Africa and the African people. We have a series of events that has culminated to the colonization and the exploitation of Africa. And today, this documentary is about that, talking about the exploitation, the colonization, and post-colonial era of African exploitation. Today, I'm going to give some series of events that will let us understand why the exploitation of Africa began with series of wars that inspired the enslaved people, and how most of the members of African population were exported, and colonization began within the 19th century. The worsening state of African security is due to this past colonial history, and how African people are still struggling to survive from the past. We have to take note of those things and how it happened before we came to this time. So, before I begin, please, I'm gonna give us some break. The break is gonna be for us to understand some brief. Before we come back, let's have this break.
Tusimame pamoja kulinda uhuru na umoja wetu. Enyi Bwana na binti wa Afrika, mwili wa jua, mwili wa anga, tuifanye Afrika mti wa uzima.
African slavery and enslavement has been in the past centuries, and we still see that happening today. We can tell from some events. Let's take a look at this short story, and we'll come back. This story tells a little bit about by Tondo Sipuye, who talks about how Africans were treated during the time of slavery, and he explained a little bit how the Africans were treated during the slave trade, and how Africans resisted. You know, it wasn't like easy for the white colonial slave owners to get their way so easily without resistance, though, you know. So this short story is just an excerpt of what the Africans went through, you know, during their days of the enslavement. And it will, you know, baffle you that most Africans passed through all this for 400 years, and a lot of things happen within that period. Okay.
Black men died in North Africa fighting the Germans. Black men died at Anzio Beach, at Palermo, at Naples, to free Rome, to free Paris, to free Europe. Damn it! Yeah. We died to build America, and America has rebuilt Germany and Japan, and the nigger is still suffering and dying in the streets of America. Black men died in North Africa fighting the Germans. Black men died at
African people. That is the African, the richness of the African people. They say Africa is rich in natural resources, ranging from arable land, water, oil, natural gas, minerals, forests, and wildlife. But why is Africa still poor? It's just like you have everything, but you are still poor. And people still ask the question, why is Africa the richest country or the richest continent, but still economically poor? People say Africa's weakened economy and political structures is particularly responsible for the fact that the continent has the largest wealth disparity in the world. They say it's the economy emphasis on natural resources and essential ecosystem, with its composing an estimated 60% of its GDP. It allows the wealth disparities to occur by providing the right conditions for monopolies. But we are talking about Africa's richness. Why is it that African countries are poor, but they have good natural resources, and all these resources cannot make them rich? Right? What is the problem? What is Africa's biggest issue? What is the biggest problem? What is happening? Okay. Some people still talk about high rates of unemployment, infant and child morbidity and mortality. Some people talk about maternal mortality. Talk about rapid population growth, environmental degradation. These are issues that we understand, right? But what is the cause of the issue with Africa? Why are they not sustainable with their own resources that they have? The Sub-Saharan African countries are still going through hell, economic environment, what we talk about pandemic, the energy crisis, and high level of public debt. These are issues, but what is going on? Let me give you a short excerpt, then we'll come back to that, okay?
One thing that keeps me puzzled, despite having studied finance and economics at the world's best universities, the following question remains unanswered. Why is it that 5,000 units of our currency is worth 1 unit of your currency, where we are the ones with the actual gold reserves? It's quite evident that the aid is in fact not coming from the West to Africa, but from Africa to the Western world. The Western world depends on Africa in every possible way, since alternative resources are scarce out here. So how does the West ensure that the free aid keeps coming? By systematically destabilizing the wealthiest African nations and their systems, and all that backed by huge PR campaigns, leaving the entire world under the impression that Africa is poor and dying and merely surviving on the mercy of the West. Well done, Oxfam, UNICEF, Red Cross, Life Aid, and all the other organizations that continuously run multi-million-dollar advertisement campaigns depicting charity porn to sustain that image of Africa globally. Ad campaigns paid for by innocent people under the impression to help with their donations. While one hand gives under the flashing lights of cameras, the other takes in the shadows. We all know the dollar is worthless, while the euro is merely charged with German intellect and technology, and maybe some Italian pasta. How can one expect donations from nations that have so little? It's super sweet of you to come with your colored paper in exchange for our gold and diamonds. But instead, you should come empty-handed, filled with integrity and honor. We want to share with you our wealth and invite you to share with us. The perception is that a healthy and striving Africa would not disperse its resources as freely and cheaply, which is logical. Of course, it would instead sell its resources at world market prices, which in turn would destabilize and weaken Western economies, established on the post-colonial free meal system. Last year, the IMF reports that 6 out of 10 of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa, measured by their GDP growth. The French Treasury, for example, is receiving about $500 billion year in, year out. Foreign exchange reserves from African countries based on colonial debt they forced them to pay. Former French President Jacques Chirac stated in an interview recently that we have to be honest and acknowledge that a big part of the money in our banks comes precisely from the exploitation of the African continent. In 2008, he stated that without Africa, France will slide down in the rank of a third world power. This is what happens in the human world, the world we have created. Have you ever wondered how things work in nature? One would assume that in evolution the fittest survives. However, in nature, any species that is overhunting, overexploiting the resources they depend on as nourishment, natural selection would sooner or later take the predator out because it offsets the balance.
This is just a tip of the iceberg that we are seeing that is happening in Africa, where we have that kind of system where African has everything, but they are poor. The exploitation on the other hand, and then let's look at the aspect of debt, African debt. Okay, now we see much of Africa's countries suffering in debt. Okay, and somebody will ask me, why is Africa so highly indebted, with the domestic capital markets increasingly indebted? Okay, what is the problem with the African politician stress on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, that they need to invest in schools, they need to invest in clinics and roads? But what is it? Why is it this problem in Africa? Okay, where African countries are defaulting on their debt. More than 23 African countries face unsustainable debt burdens. Okay, they can't survive because they have a lot of debt to pay. Okay, what is the problem? It is just really striking that out of more than 50 countries in Africa, only about 2 stop servicing their external debt. Okay, Ghana and Zambia. Okay, why the others are still struggling to still borrow money for sustainable development? What is the problem? Let's listen to this and let's understand certain issue about African debt. Okay.
And what's the difference between the U.S. debt and the debt that African nations own? Because the U.S. debt doesn't keep the U.S. from being one of the leading powers of the world, but then African nations can't make it because of that debt that is strangling them.
Okay. The first question is a very important question. What makes African and third world debt different from the American debt? Number one, America is never going to pay its debts. It doesn't have to. Its debts are in its own currency. We can simply print it. The African debt is not in its currency. The African debt is in U.S. dollars. Africa has to earn the U.S. dollars, and the only way it can earn the U.S. dollars is not to be assassinated for growing its own food and becoming independent and doing something that the United States does not like. The principle underlying the foundation of the World Bank is that no country should grow its own food. Africa and the third world should only grow export crops. To export, in order to have an oversupply of cocoa and other tropical raw materials, to keep down the price, they must buy their grain from the United States or Europe, so that if they do something that we don't like, we can do what America tried to do to China in the 60s. We can sanction them. We can say, we're going to starve you. We're going to not export any grain to you. So owing their foreign debt in dollars means that they have to somehow sell something that the United States wants, not what they want. I think the most evil organizations in the world today are the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund.
Wow. I just listened to that. Some people will have goosebumps, but you understand why African countries are indebted and European countries are not, right? Where you have the currency, their currency is being printed in their own currency. They can print their money and they will not ever pay their own debt, right? But African countries have to pay their debt. Okay. Then that takes us to about sanctions, right? When you look at sanctions today, Africans, apart from the debt, they have a lot of sanctions on them. When you have sanction and debt at the same time, it's very difficult for you to cope, right? You saw what the recent countries have been sanctioned for coup d'etats, like in Niger, that the ECOWAS sanctioned Niger. We also have coup sanction from the other countries, right? But this sanction is part of the exploitation, because when they sanction you, you become more indebted. Okay, the economy cannot survive. The political system will be in turmoil. Okay, and the Western countries will come and support another leader, and you are ousted. Okay, so economic coup, political coup, or whatever type of coup is a coup. So far as you are not in line with what the people in in the Western countries need, you'll be ousted. There's no question about that. Okay. Now, let's take a listen at this. Then they will come back.
Wow, wow, wow. I just heard the news. The word on the street coming from Europe and also here in America is saying that the Western world in America has frozen ECOWAS Bank, the World Bank, and they are threatening them if they don't take measurement to the problem in Niger, that they will do more. So, America and the Western world, they want the African leaders to go to war with each other. so they will have the opportunity to come and rob the rest of the resources that that continent has. You ask them to go fight their neighbors. They voted no. They're not going to fight their neighbors. Now, you guys are threatening them and warning them and actually blocked their World Bank that they're dealing with. African leaders, I hope you guys are learning now. Now it's time for you guys to be trading among each other. Stop exporting goods to this motherfucking Western world and the United States. Because as I said before, the mineral they need is right there in Africa. That's why they want you guys to go fight. And you don't want to fight, and they are closing your account. Isn't that weird? Scam ass motherfuckers. Crook ass motherfuckers. Seriously crook ass motherfuckers. Stop exporting shit to them. Stop the cocoa, stop the gold, stop the oil, stop everything that goes in Europe. Stop it. Let them starve. Let them suffer. They want you guys to go attack your own fucking neighbors so they can come and have the resources. And you guys say no. And now they are pressuring you guys and close your fucking bank account. The audacity. There's nothing to be discussing with them. What the fuck? Are you kidding?
So this take us to exploitation and how African leaders are being economically exploited in terms of the contracts that they sign. And some sign to have memorandum of understanding. Some contracts have with some multilateral, multinational companies are being cancelled. A lot of contracts, trade, which is unjust trade structures. You see, rich countries create unjust trading structures that by shielding their markets with high agricultural tariffs and heavily this subsidizing their own agriculture. Okay, this helped to slow down the development of agriculture on the African continent, causing it to suffer from this outset. Okay, now the issue is that African majority of African countries depend on agriculture. When they produce their produce, they have their cash crop, they have their their food. mm, Shipping them to Western countries, they have to spend more money. Okay, and the people that come to buy them don't buy them, in good prices. So the farmers spend all their year, one full year, to produce something like cocoa, coffee, or rubber, timber, and so on. Then people come and buy it so cheap. Okay, and it's these multinational companies that come to represent these countries, right? If you say America, it's not even America coming there. It's the American companies or French companies or British companies. Those are the people that come and exploit. So at the end of the day, they make these rich countries create that kind of unjust trading environment, which is really, really difficult for the farmers, and that is why you see these unjust trade structures where African farmers are at the plight of the foreign companies that come to do business. What we are talking here is part of the exploitation, right? Yeah, because the African countries don't have means to work against this, right? They just have to, because they want to sell their produce, right?
And all we need to do is give the world an overdose of our truth and insist on it. As we speak today, I'm going to take you back centuries before the children of Africa were taken out of Africa as slaves. There was some serious resistance when the occupiers from the West came to Africa, contrary to what some might think. They didn't just give up their children, but the fighting began long before slavery. And the resistance was those who led them, the majority of them, their heads, as we speak today, are sitting in jars in Europe. Are you aware of that? Our leaders, our ancestors who fought the wars of resistance, their heads, their remains are sitting in jars throughout Europe. And the same people have the audacity to come to Africa and talk to us about human rights. But what's even more disturbing is that we entertain them and we don't remind them of these skeletons in their closet. As we speak today, the priceless artifacts that they stole from all over Africa are sitting in their museums throughout Europe. And when you and I, when we visit Europe, we pay to see what belongs to us. Evidence of theft, evidence of murder on display in plain sight.
That is some of the happenings in the African continent, right, during the slave time, and some is still happening today, where we see this exploitation and okay, that still leads us to this issue of same-sex marriage, where some African countries are being, like, some aid is being tied to having accept of same-sex marriage, where most African countries are not used to, right? We see some countries are being asked to accept same-sex marriage, else their debt will not be accepted, okay, or that kind of thing that they are forcing African countries to accept. Let's take a listen to this, then we'll come back to that.
In other developments that we are tracking, the Vatican has forbidden blessings to same-sex relationships. In the latest decree approved by the Pope Francis, the Vatican has said that priests cannot bless same-sex unions. The Roman Catholic Church has described such relationships as, quote, not ordered to the Creator's plan, and that the blessings of homosexual unions cannot be considered. The Vatican's doctrinal watchdog, Holy See, has issued an explanatory note that carries the weight of a universal ground rule for the Roman Catholic Church. It refers to homosexuality as a choice and says it cannot be recognized as objectively ordered to God's plan. The statement also says, and I'm quoting, God does not and cannot bless sin. The Church does not have and cannot have the power to bless unions of persons of the same sex. The decision is a setback for Catholics who had hoped for the institution to modernize with time, especially in regards to homosexuality. Dozens of countries, including many in Western Europe, have legalized same-sex marriages. The Vatican's resistance to embrace the LGBT community has alienated it from younger followers. The Church considers marriage as an exclusive union of man and woman.
That is, we'll come after this break.
Tuungane sote na tushereke pamoja ushindi kwa ukombozi wetu. Tujitoe wenyewe, tusimame pamoja kulinda uhuru na umoja wetu. Enyi Bwana na binti wa Afrika, mwili wa jua, mwili wa anga,
Africa, let's talk about the educational system and how most of the educational system that we have, we understand that the European came to implement their system. But at the end of the day, when you have a degree, for example, in Africa, you come here, it's not recognized, right? It's the same education that they taught us. But why? Because there are things that if you study in Africa, you come to Europe, they don't recognize it. But is it because the educational system is not the same, or what? What is the problem? People want to understand. And I have an excerpt here, and you understand some of it, of why the educational system. Wow, that is a good explanation. I think we have understood how we have to teach our children now about the difference between the Western culture education and the African education. Okay, but if Africans are not having a united voice,
someone must speak the.
How can they survive, or how can they fight against these issues that affect them? Let's listen to Professor Lumumba talking about African unity and African issues. And
we must unite now. We must have one army. We must have one currency. We must have one foreign policy. We must be united. And I can hear the Osagyefo saying, I do not want to be the leader of that country. I simply want unity. And I'm saying that we must live here with one united government. They listen not to the Osagyefo. I can still hear those immortal words of the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah telling his Ghanaian peoples that the independence of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not independent. I can hear the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah
wow, that is a good. That's a good revelation. Okay, and we have to understand how it goes down. Okay, most of African countries are not united. They don't have that idea of being united, right? They prefer to go and talk and talk and talk. But after all this is French president. Let's listen to him.
Dear distinguished delegates, I stand before you today, April 30th, 2023, as the President of the French Republic, to express my deepest apologies to the African nations and peoples who were affected by France's colonial past. We recognize the harm and damage caused by our actions, and we are committed to making amends for the wrongs committed during that period. To the people of Algeria, I apologize for the harm caused by our colonization. We acknowledge the historical injustices committed during that period, as well as the pain and trauma that we continue to cause. We pledge to work towards healing and reconciliation with the Algerian people, and to foster a new relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. To the people of Benin, we deeply regret the harm caused by France's abhorrent actions. We acknowledge the exploitation of your resources and culture and the deep scars left by colonialism. We apologize for the damage done and commit to working towards a new relationship with the people of Benin based on absolute respect. To the people of Burkina Faso, we apologize for the harm caused by France's repugnant colonization. We acknowledge the exploitation of your resources and culture and the deep scars left behind by our evil deeds. We pledge to work towards atonement because words alone is not enough. To the people of Cameroon, we express our deepest apologies for the generational harm caused by France's atrocious
Wow. I can understand where he's coming from. This is the first French president that kind of declared his apology openly, in the United Nations, and you can understand why he's doing this, because of the anti-French policy that is going across Africa now. Okay, it is just very, very different as back in the days. This time around, most African countries are trying to fight back on the colonial past. Okay, take a listen at Professor Lumumba.
That you must listen very carefully to your enemies, because sometimes they tell you the truth that you do not want to hear but need to hear. Sometimes you are surrounded by a coterie of people who pretend to be your friends, but they are not. They are friends of the office that you hold and the things and the doors that you can open for them. That requires discernment. That requires detachment. That requires focus. That requires selflessness. That requires intellectual firepower and spiritual contentment. Easier said than done. Power, it is said, corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But I remember the great Tanzanian President Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere used to say that when you are called upon to serve, remember that you are not necessarily the best, but you've been given the honor and privilege of serving. That is why we call you honorable. That is why sometimes we even call you Excellency, not because you are excellent yourself, but we expect you to do excellent things. If you surround yourself with the wrong people who will continue to worship you, very soon you get used to being worshipped, then you become a demigod, and you become hostile to truth, and you become attracted to flattery. The strength of character is very important, and power does not change people. Power reveals who you truly are or truly are. I've interacted with individuals even across this continent, men and women who mean well, and they serve well. I was telling a friend of mine who is a senior politician in Kenya that one of the greatest hallmarks of a servant leader is that when he or she receives a letter from a citizen, he or she acknowledges the letter. And I've dealt with many African heads of state, and to their credit, quite a number of them, they will cause the letter to be acknowledged. In Kenya, which is my country, you write to leaders, they never respond. Never. Because there is arrogance, which is tragic. So what must one do when one gets into public office? Humility must never abandon you. I've had the opportunity myself of serving in public spaces in this country on 3 different occasions, and in my view, have never changed. I've always realized that power is temporal, and that you only do your bit and leave. As William Shakespeare once said, all the world is but a stage. We have our comings and goings. If you remember that, you'll remember to always have humility as your shadow. Most African politicians, I'm very reluctant to use the word leaders when I make reference to most African politicians. They occupy positions of leadership, but they are not leaders, most of them. First of all, the intention with which they enter into leadership is the problem. They seek office because they love power and privilege and opportunity that it provides to them. They want to become wealthy. And the easiest and shortest avenue to wealth in Africa today is public office. With the minimum effort, you become a multi-millionaire. They go there in order to be worshipped. And they go there not to do the right thing. And once they have been in office, they do so many wrong things that it becomes dangerous for them to leave office. So their continued occupation of office is also to ensure that they enjoy immunity that comes with office. But when you are a good leader who does the right thing, you do not fear to leave office because nothing has changed. And I've seen leaders of that ilk in this part of the continent. And there are quite a number of sprinkling of leaders who have left office and are doing great things. Joachim Chissano in Mozambique. Ifikepunye Pohamba in Botswana. People like my good friend Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, Ali Hassan Mwinyi in Tanzania, Benjamin William Mkapa, Joachim Chissano, as I've said, of Mozambique. These are people who have left office and nothing is happening to them because they are men and women of integrity. John Mahama of Ghana. There are quite a number of them now across the continent who do not fear being out of office, and they are doing great things once they leave office. But there are others who will never leave office because the day they leave office, holding all factors constant, they ought to be arrested.
Well, it is very clear that we have seen African leaders fail because they don't understand leadership. And Uh, this documentary was just to tell you the trend of events, how African leaders have failed. Most of them have no independence conscience in defending the sovereignty of their respective countries. And what do? Yeah, they cannot protect the freedoms, the liberties, and social development of their people due to neo-colonialism, the political greed, and corruption. This documentary is just to tell you that African leaders need to change. Okay, this has been the character of some African leadership in recent history, where the political system, the tendency for power to consume leaders is very much real. Okay, and we have been aware of all the African leaders who are overstaying in power. Okay, and they have been corrupt and absolutely corrupt themselves in power, that they don't feel comfortable leaving office peacefully. Their legacy has been destroyed. We have heard of African leaders who decided on serving on 3 terms in their presidency. Why? Gabon is just one example. Niger was another example. The recent example that we are still looking at, that he was warned and he said, okay, he's not going to go for 3rd term, is Macky Sall of Senegal. The people told him, please don't change that constitution. Allow that constitution as it is. Do your 2 terms and go. Okay. He was one of the presidents who accepted that he's not going to go in for 3rd term. We know of these leaders who are currently contemplating 2nd term, like Macky Sall. There are many of them. We know that there is no upper age limit in this power African politics, right? So these politicians who have been in politics for decades are still refusing to give away to younger generation. Okay, that is the problem in Africa. Why are they doing that? And this is the leadership style, the season of darkness in African leadership. Africa is going through this era of dictatorship, how self-perpetuating rule is now polarizing the whole era. What is the problem? Because they want to live from leaders to rulers, rulers to kings to kingdoms. Think about it. Are you going to allow your president to do that? No. The military are allowed to take over and put in a new president for democracy to rule. That is the only way they can stop these dictators, these power-hungry mongers, these people who don't want to respect democracy. And the international community can come and say whatever they want. That's their problem. But that is the way African leaders want to leave office. They don't want to leave office peacefully. They'll prefer to fail. They'll prefer to destroy their legacy, destroy their images. They don't care about their image anymore. So the only way they want to live is by going through the hard way, which is the only way for them. Then they start begging people to come and help them. We saw Ali Bongo begging. How can you be in power for that long? Then you are begging people to make some noise. What noise do you want people to make for you? You have had 2 terms. You want to go for 3rd term and you are not even strong enough. Someone that is walking so frail, so haggard, you want to still go in. Your people are happy that you leave office now. Look at the way you left office. Even the one in Mohammed in Niger. Look at the way he was sent out of the presidential palace in shame. Look how shameful it is Ali Bongo begging people to make some noise. What noise do you want them to make for you? What noise? That's a lesson for our African people. Thank you. See you in the next episode.